parli Italiano? Or are the pictures enough for you? His wineglass tilts. Red spills like a slow accusation across the white linen. She doesn't answer. He smiles wider. He thinks the silence is surrender. He doesn't notice the slight pause before her breath. Doesn't realize she has already translated every word he whispered 5 minutes ago. Go on, he presses. Say something. She lifts her eyes, not angry, not embarrassed, calculating. He believes he's exposing an ignorant waitress. In truth, he has just confessed in front of the only person in the room who understands exactly what he said. And she's done pretending not to. The Friday night dinner rush at Vincenzo's was not merely a busy shift. It was a battlefield of porcelain and pretension. Located in the heart of the financial district, the restaurant didn't just serve food, it served status. The lighting was low. The tablecloths were an aggressive, blinding white, and the air smelled of black truffles and old money. Alice Bennett adjusted her apron in the narrow mirrored hallway connecting the kitchen to the dining room. At 28, Alice had the kind of beauty that was often overlooked because it was currently hidden behind a mask of exhaustion. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a severe bun that pulled at her temples, and her uniform, a stiff black waistcoat, and trousers felt like a straight jacket. Table 4 is asking for the sommelier again. Giovanni, the floor manager, hissed as he brushed past her, clutching a reservation tablet like a shield. And Alice, fix your collar. You look like you've been running a marathon. Clears throat. I have been. Geo, Alice murmured, though she fixed the collar immediately. She checked her reflection. Dark circles haunted to the skin beneath her eyes, concealed poorly by drugstore concealer. Nobody at Vincenzo's cared that her mother Martha had just started her 3rd round of chemo that morning. Nobody cared that Alice had spent the hours of 2:00 a.m. to 6 a.m. transcribing legal documents just to pay the heating bill before sleeping for 3 hours and coming here. Here she was, just a vessel for pasta and wine, a pair of hands a phantom. She pushed through the heavy velvet curtains and stepped onto the floor. The noise hit her instantly, a low, sophisticated roar of clinking silverware and deals being struck. Alice took a deep breath, centering herself. Rent, medical bills, groceries, just get through the night. She was assigned Section B, the prime real estate near the floor, toe-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. It was usually reserved for the VIPs, the regulars who tipped well but demanded your soul in exchange. As she cleared an appetizer plate from a polite elderly couple, she saw the hostess guiding a new party to table 12, the best table in the house. Her stomach dropped. She knew him not personally, of course, but by reputation. Every server in the city knew Preston Halloway. He was a hedge fund manager who appeared in Forbes almost as often as he appeared in the tabloids for lawsuits involving unpaid contractors. He was a man who moved through the world as if he owned the pavement he walked on. Walking beside him was a woman Alice hadn't seen before. She was younger, perhaps Alice's age, dripping in diamonds that caught the candlelight. She looked nervous, her eyes darting around the room as if she were afraid of touching anything. Preston didn't walk. He patrolled. He sat down without waiting for the hostess to pull out his chair, immediately snapping his fingers in the air without looking up. Menu. He barked at the empty air. Alice's heart hammered against her ribs. She handed the dirty plates to a busboy and smoothed her apron. She was a professional. She was educated. She was strong. She could handle a bully in a bespoke suit. She approached the table, placing 2 leather-bound menus down with practiced grace. Good evening, sir, madam. Welcome to Vincenzo's. My name is Alice, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you with Preston Halloway? Didn't look at her. He was busy looking at the wine list, frowning as if the vintage selection had personally insulted him. He waved a hand dismissively in her direction, effectively cutting off her greeting. Water sparkling and none of that domestic trash. Bring the Pelro and ice, but on the side. I hate when it dilutes the bubbles. Of course, Sir Alice said, her voice steady. She turned to the woman. And for you, miss? The woman opened her mouth to speak, but Preston answered for her. She'll have the same. And bring the bread basket. The focaccia better be warm this time. Last time I was here, it was lukewarm. Unacceptable for these prices. I will ensure it comes straight from the oven, Alice said. She turned to leave, but Preston's voice stopped her. It wasn't a request. It was a sneer. Wait. Alice paused and turned back. Preston finally looked up. His eyes were sore, assessing her, not as a human being, but as an object that he found lacking. He looked at her scuffed work shoes, her fraying cuff, and the tired set of her shoulders. You're new to this section, he accused. Where is Antonio? He usually serves me. Antonio is off tonight, sir. Alice replied politely. I assure you I am fully capable of providing excellent service. Preston laughed. It was a dry, hacking sound. Capable? We'll see. You look like you'd be more comfortable working at a diner, sweetheart. Try not to spill anything on my suit. It's Italian silk. Worth more than your yearly salary, I'd wager. The woman across from him looked down at her lap, embarrassed. Alice felt the heat rise in her cheeks, a flush of humiliation, but she swallowed it down. I'll get your water, sir, she said, turning on her heel. As she walked away, she heard him mutter to his companion loud enough for Alice to hear. Hard to find good help. They hire anyone off the street these days. Probably can't even spell hors d'oeuvre. Alice gripped the silver water pitcher in the service station so hard her knuckles turned white. Do it for Mom, she repeated internally. Do it for the medicine. But the night was just beginning, and Preston Hallow was just getting warmed up. By 8:30 p.m., the restaurant was at capacity. The kitchen was in the weeds. Tickets were printing endlessly. The chefs were shouting in a mix of English and Neapolitan dialect, and the steam from the pasta water made the air thick and heavy. Alice was balancing 3 tables at once, but Preston Holloway demanded 90% of her attention. He had sent back the wine, claimed it was cacked though it wasn't. He had sent back the bread, claimed it was too doughy. He had snapped his fingers at her across the room while she was taking an order from another table. She approached table 12 to take their main course order. Preston was leaning forward, speaking in a low, intense voice to the woman whom he called Jessica. The merger has to happen in Milan. Preston was saying, his voice carrying an edge of desperation masked by bravado. If the regulatory board looks too closely at the books in New York, we're finished. That's why I need you to sign the papers as the temporary trustee. Jessica looked terrified. But Preston, I don't understand Italian law. What if Quiet Preston hissed, spotting Alice? He sat back, smoothing his tie, his demeanor switching instantly from conspirator to king. Are you ready to order? Alice asked, pad in hand. Preston looked at her with renewed disdain. He picked up the menu, which was written entirely in Italian with small English descriptions underneath. Vincenzo's prided itself on authenticity. I'll have the osso buo, Preston said, mispronouncing it horribly as O, and she will have the risotto of fungi. Excellent choices, Alice said. Would you like to hear the specials? We have a wonderful Preston cut her off with a sharp hand gesture. I don't need the specials. I need competence. He looked at Jessica, a cruel glint entering his eyes. He clearly wanted to show off, to assert dominance in front of this woman he was trying to manipulate. Tell me, Preston said, leaning back and crossing his arms. Do you even know what you're serving, or do you just memorize the numbers? I know the menu very well, sir, Alice said softly. Really? Preston smirked. Because this is an Italian establishment, a place of culture. Do you speak the language, or are you just pretending? The restaurant was loud, but it felt like the noise around table 12 dropped into a vacuum. A nearby couple stopped eating to watch. Alice tightened her grip on her pen. I understand the menu perfectly, sir. That's not what I asked. Preston goad. I asked if you speak Italian. Parla Italiano. He butchered the accent, making it sound like a caricature. Alice hesitated. She could answer him. She could shut him down right now. But she knew the rules of the service industry. You never outshine the guest. You never make the guest feel stupid, even if they are wrong. If she embarrassed a high roller like Holloway Giovanni might fire her. She couldn't risk the paycheck. I know enough to ensure your dining expo experience is perfect. She deflected diplomatically. Preston laughed a loud barking sound that drew eyes from across the room. I knew it, ignorant. Just another uneducated girl carrying plates. It's pathetic, really. You work in an Italian restaurant, and you can't even speak the language of the food you serve. He turned to Jessica, speaking as if Alice wasn't there. See, this is the problem with this country. No standards. In Rome, the waiters are professionals. Here, we get high school dropouts. Jessica looked mortified. Preston, please stop. It's fine. It's not fine, Jessica. It's about excellence. He looked back at Alice, his eyes narrowing. Since you're so limited, I'll make it simple. Bring us the food. Don't speak unless spoken to, and try to look a little less miserable. You're ruining the ambiance. Alice felt a cold, hard stone form in her stomach. It wasn't fear anymore. It was a calm, icy rage. She nodded once, a sharp, mechanical motion. As you wish, sir. She walked away, her back straight as a rod. As she reached the service station, Giovanni grabbed her arm. He had seen the interaction. Alice, take 5 minutes, he whispered. You're shaking. I'm fine, she said, her voice eerily calm. He's a pig, Giovanni said. But he spends $5,000 a month here. Just endure it. He'll be gone in an hour. Oh, I'll endure it, Alice whispered, looking back at table 12. Preston was leaning in again, whispering to Jessica. He switched languages. He started speaking in Italian fluent, rapid-fire Italian. He clearly assumed that since Alice had dodged his question and since she was just a high school dropout waitress, the air around him was safe. He assumed the language barrier was a wall. Alice stood by the espresso machine polishing a glass. She closed her eyes for a second, tuning out the clatter of the kitchen and focusing her hearing. Her mother, Martha, hadn't always been sick. Before the cancer, before the debt, Martha had been a professor of Romance languages at Columbia University. Alice hadn't just learned Italian in a classroom. She had grown up spending summers in Florence. She had a master's degree in comparative linguistics that she was currently not using because the academic job market had crashed and she needed fast cash for medical bills. She wasn't just fluent, she was native level. And from 20 feet away, over the den of the dining room, she heard Preston say in Italian. Clears throat. Translation. Listen, Jessica, it doesn't matter if the documents are fake. Once you sign, the debt is in your name. I'll be clean. If the bank investigates, you take the fall, and I keep the money. You are the only one who can save me. Alice's eyes snapped open. The polishing cloth stopped moving. This wasn't just arrogance anymore. This was a crime. He was setting this terrified woman up to take the fall for financial fraud. He was ruining her life over a plate of rosto, confident that the dumb waitress was just part of the furniture. Alice looked at the table. Preston was smiling, pouring more wine, thinking he had won. She set the glass down. Giovanni, Elise said, her voice changing. The exhaustion was gone, replaced by a sharp, dangerous clarity. I'm going to take the dessert order for table 12. Alice, don't. Giovanni warned. Let Marco take it. You don't need the abuse. No, Alice said, untouring her apron and retying it tighter like a soldier preparing for battle. A small, cold smile touched her lips. I insist. I think Mr. Halloway and I have a lot to talk about. She picked up the dessert menu. She didn't look like a victim anymore. She looked like a predator who had just spotted a wounded gazelle. Alice walked back toward the table. But this time, she didn't walk like a servant. She walked like she owned the place. Alice moved through the dining room with a new energy. It wasn't the frantic hustle of a server trying to keep up. It was the measured, silent stride of a hunter stalking prey. The noise of the restaurant, the clinking of silverware, the hum of jazz, the laughter faded into the background of her mind. All she could focus on was table 12 and the crime unfolding in plain sight. She stopped at the service station to pick up the main course tray. The heavy ceramic plates of osbuco and risotto yunghi were piping hot. Careful, it's hot, the expediter warned. Alice didn't feel the heat. She felt only the cold resolve settling in her chest. She remembered the look on Jessica's face, the trembling hands, the naive trust. She remembered her own mother lying in a hospital bed, worried about bills because insurance companies played games with people's lives. Men like Preston Holloway treated the world like a game of Monopoly where they could flip the board whenever they were losing. Not tonight. Alice approached the table. Preston had stopped speaking Italian. He was now back to English, leaning back in his chair, swirling his red wine with an air of smug satisfaction. A thick folder of documents lay open on the table, dangerously close to the butter plate. So you see, Sweetie Preston was saying, his voice dripping with false reassurance. It's just a formality, a temporary holding shell for the assets. Once you sign as the trustee, I can move the capital and we'll be on a plane to KO by Tuesday. Jessica held a gold fountain pen. Preston's pen hovering over the signature line. I feel like I should have my lawyer look at this. Preston, it's a lot of legal jargon. Preston's smile tightened at the edges. Jessica, baby, do you trust me? Or do you trust some billing hour shark who just wants to charge you $500 to read a standard form? I'm doing this for us. Alice stepped into the light of their table. Pardon the interruption. Your entree. Preston looked up annoyed. He covered the papers with his hand, shielding them from Alice's view. About time. Clear's throat. I was about to call the manager. Alice placed the risotto in front of Jessica with gentle precision. Risotto with wild porcini mushrooms, finished with truffle oil, she said softly. She turned to Preston. She set the osobo down. The rich scent of braised V and saffron rose between them. And for the gentleman, Alice said, her voice neutral. The osobo. Finally, Preston grunted. He picked up his fork, not looking at her. You can go now and bring more wine. Alice didn't move. She stood at the edge of the table, her hands clasped behind her back, her posture perfect. Is there a problem? Preston snapped, sensing her lingering presence. He looked up, his eyes narrowing. I said you can go. Alice met his gaze. For the first time all night, she didn't look down. She looked him dead in the eye, and a small, unrecognizable smile touched her lips. Misuzi Senor Alice began, her voice changing. The flat, tired American accent vanished. In its place was the melodious, crisp diction of someone who had learned Italian in the lecture halls of Florence. Translation. Excuse me, sir. I just wanted to ensure the flavor was to your liking. Sometimes the meat can be tough if it is not cooked with honesty. Preston froze. His fork stopped halfway to his mouth. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like a shade was pulled down. Jessica looked between them, confused. What did she say? Preston dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against the china. Nothing. He stammered, his eyes wide, locked on Alice. She's just babbling. Alice stepped closer, leaning in, slightly invading his personal space, just enough to be unsettling. She wasn't shouting. She was whispering, but her enunciation was perfect. Our answer, Elise continued in flawless Italian, her eyes boring into his translation. You said the only requirement for this job is ignorance. But you are mistaken, Mr. Holloway. Ignorance is dangerous, especially when one speaks of bank fraud out loud in a public place. Preston's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish pulled onto a dock, gasping, terrified, stripped of his element. What is going on? Jessica asked, her voice rising in panic. Preston, you said she didn't speak Italian? Alice turned to Jessica. She switched back to English. Her voice warm and compassionate, completely different from the steel she had just used on Preston. He lied to you, miss, Alice said clearly, just like he is lying about those papers. Preston slammed his hand on the table, rattling the wine glasses. Shut up, you're fired, get out of my face. He stood up his chair, scraping violently against the floor, heads turned from every table nearby. Giovanni, the manager, was already speed-walking toward them from the host stand, his face pale. But Alice didn't flinch. She was the calmest person in the chaos she had just created. I might be fired, Alice said, her voice carrying through the sudden silence of the restaurant. But you, Mr. Holloway, are going to jail. The atmosphere in Vincenzo's shifted instantly from fine dining to high drama. The jazz music seemed to stop. Or perhaps everyone just stopped listening. Giovanni arrived at the table breathless. "Senor Holloway, please." "What is the matter, Alice? Step back." This peasant?" Preston sputtered, pointing a shaking finger at Alice. His arrogance was crumbling into panic. "She is harassing me. She is threatening my guest. I want her removed immediately. I will sue this place into the ground." Giovanni turned to Alice, his eyes pleading. "Alice, go to the kitchen now." "No, Giovanni," Alice said firmly. She stayed planted next to Jessica. "If I leave, this woman signs a document that makes her liable for millions of dollars in fraudulent debt." Jessica gasped, pulling her hand away from the papers as if they were burning. "What she's lying," Preston screamed. Veins bulged in his neck. "She's a crazy waitress. She wants a tip. She's trying to extort me." Alice looked at Jessica. "He spoke to you in Italian because he thought I was too stupid to understand. He said, and I quote, 'It doesn't matter if the documents are fake. If the bank investigates, she takes the fall and I keep the money.'" Jessica looked at Preston. The betrayal on her face was heartbreaking. She saw the sweat on his upper lip, the frantic darting of his eyes. She saw the truth. "Is that true?" Jessica whispered. "Jessica, baby, don't listen to the help," Preston pleaded, reaching for her hand. Jessica snatched her hand away. She grabbed the folder of documents. "Give me that." Preston lunged across the table, but Alice was faster. She stepped in front of Preston, blocking him with her body. She was smaller than him, but in that moment she felt 10 feet tall. "Don't touch her," Alice commanded. "Get out of my way, you little—" Preston raised a hand, his fist clenched. "Do it." A deep voice boomed from the next table. Preston froze. At table 14, a man had stood up. He was older, with silver hair and a suit that was understated, but clearly cost more than Preston's flashy attire. He had been eating alone reading a book, but now he was standing holding his napkin. It was Judge Arthur Sterling. Alice recognized him immediately. He came in every Thursday for the Branzino. He was a federal circuit judge for the Southern District of New York, a man whose name struck fear into the hearts of Wall Street criminals. Judge Sterling walked over his face like granite. "I suggest you lower your hand, Mr. Holloway," Sterling said. His voice was gravel and authority. "Unless you want to add assault to the list of felonies you've already confessed to tonight." Preston looked at the judge, and the recognition hit him like a physical blow. His face went grey. "Judge Sterling, I didn't know you were clearly," Sterling said dryly. He looked at Alice. "I speak a little Italian myself, though not as elegantly as this young woman. I heard every word. Holloway, fake documents, clean hands. She takes the fall." It was quite the confession. Preston slumped back into his chair, defeated. The fight drained out of him, leaving only a hollow shell of a man. Clear his throat. Jessica stood up, clutching her purse. She was shaking, tears streaming down her face. She looked at the papers, then at Preston. She ripped the contract in half, then in quarters. She threw the confetti of paper into his face. "I was going to mortgage my grandmother's house for you," Jessica sobbed. "I trusted you." "Jessica, wait." Preston started weakly. "Don't," she spat. She turned to Alice. She didn't know what to say. She just reached out and squeezed Alice's hand. "Thank you. Oh my God. Thank you." "Go," Alice whispered to her. "Get a cab. Go home." Jessica ran out of the restaurant, the sound of her heels clicking on the hardwood, the only sound in the room. Preston sat amidst the torn papers, the ossobuco getting cold in front of him. He looked up at Giovanni. "I want my check." Judge Sterling scoffed. "You're not going anywhere, Holloway. I've already text messaged my detail. The police are on their way." The police arrived 10 minutes later. It was a quiet affair. Vincenzo's was a respectable establishment after all. 2 officers escorted a silent, sullen Preston Holloway out the back entrance to avoid the paparazzi, who were inevitably starting to gather out front. As the squad car lights flashed against the window, the dining room slowly returned to life. But the energy had changed. The patrons weren't looking at their phones or their food. They were looking at Alice. Alice was in the back hallway, leaning against the wall, her adrenaline crashing, her hands were finally shaking. Giovanni came around the corner. He looked exhausted. He held a glass of water. "Here," he said, handing it to her. "Am I fired?" Alice asked, taking the glass. She stared at the water, watching the ripples. Giovanni sighed. He leaned against the wall next to her. "Preston Halloway spends $60,000 a year here." Alice nodded. "I know. I'm sorry, Gio. I couldn't let him do it." "He was a pig," Giovanni said. He looked at Alice, really looked at her for the first time in, clears throat, months. "And you speak Italian better than I do. And I'm from Naples." Alice managed a weak smile. "My mother was a professor. I grew up bilingual." "Why are you waiting tables?" Giovanni asked gently. "Why are you here carrying trays for minimum wage medical bills?" Alice said simply. "Mom's cancer came back. The treatments are expensive. I needed the tips." Giovanni nodded slowly. "You caused a scene, Alice. A big one." Clears throat. "I know." But Giovanni continued a smile breaking through his stress. "Judge Sterling just ordered a bottle of the 1990 Barolo, and he said he won't drink it unless you pour it. He wants to talk to you." Alice straightened up. The judge and Alice. Giovanni put a hand on her shoulder. "You're not fired. In fact, if you want starting tomorrow, you're not a server anymore. I need a floor manager who can handle the difficult clientele. The pay is double." Alice felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you, Gio. Go." He nudged her. "Table 14. The judge is waiting." Alice wiped her face, smoothed her apron, and walked back out onto the floor. Judge Arthur Sterling was sitting calmly, the expensive bottle of wine unopened on the table. When Alice approached, he gestured to the empty chair across from him. Clears throat. "Sit," he said. It wasn't a command. It was an invitation. "I shouldn't, Your Honor. I'm on the clock," Alice said. "I own the clock for the next hour," Sterling said with a twinkle in his eye. "Please, I have a proposition for you." Alice sat down gingerly. "You have a sharp mind," Alice Sterling said, pouring 2 glasses of water. "And a sharp ear. I watched you tonight. You didn't just understand the language. You understood the leverage. You waited for the perfect moment. You gathered evidence. You protected the victim." "I just did what was right," Alice said. "That's rare enough these days," Sterling mused. "But tell me, how did you know the legal implications of what he was saying? You mentioned fraudulent debt and trustee liability with a lot of confidence for a waitress." "I have a master's in comparative linguistics," Alice admitted. "But before the market crashed and before my mum got sick, I was studying for the LSATs. I wanted to be a lawyer. I've spent the last 3 years reading legal briefs at 300 a.m. to make extra money as a transcriptionist." Sterling raised an eyebrow. He took a sip of water, studying her. "So you're telling me," Sterling said slowly, "that I have a young woman here who is fluent in Italian, understands contract law, has a moral compass that withstood a billionaire's pressure, and can handle a hostile witness, sorry customer, without breaking a sweat." "I suppose so," Alice said. Sterling reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. It wasn't the flashy gold-embossed card of a hedge fund manager. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock with simple black text. "Sterling Thorne and Associates. I'm retiring from the bench next month." Sterling said, "I'm returning to private practice. My firm handles international corporate law. We have a lot of clients in Milan and Rome. We need associates who can read between the lines." He slid the card across the table. "I can't hire you as a lawyer yet," Sterling said, "but I can hire you as a senior paralegal and translator. The starting salary is significantly higher than what you make here, and we have a very robust health insurance plan that covers immediate family members. 100% coverage." Alice stared at the card. The world seemed to stop spinning. The noise of the restaurant fell away again, but this time it wasn't replaced by rage. It was replaced by hope. "Health insurance," she whispered. "Full dental too." Sterling smiled. If you can start Monday. Alice looked up at him, tears finally spilling over. These weren't tears of humiliation. They were tears of relief. The weight of the tray, the weight of the bills, the weight of the world. It was all lifting. I can start Monday, Alice said, her voice trembling. Good, Sterling said. He tapped the wine bottle. Now, would you mind pouring this, it needs to breathe, and then tell me everything that pompous fool said to you before I intervened? I want to make sure the district attorney has a watertight case. Alice picked up the bottle. Her hands were steady again. With pleasure, Your Honor. 6 months had passed since the incident at Vincenzo's, but for Alice time had behaved strangely. Her life had transformed completely. She was now working as a paralegal at Sterling Thorne, and associates wearing tailored suits instead of a stained waistcoat, and her mother was responding well to the new treatment protocol that Alice's insurance finally covered. But the shadow of Preston Halloway still loomed over her. The trial of United States versus Preston Halloway had become a media circus. The Waitress whistleblower headline had run in every paper in New York. While the public initially sided with Alice Preston's PR team, had been working overtime to change the narrative they painted him as a misunderstood genius and Alice as a desperate, debt-ridden opportunist looking for a payout. The trial was held at the Third Marshall United States Courthouse in Lower Manhattan. The room was a cavern of mahogany and marble, smelling of floor wax and anxiety. Alice sat in the witness waiting room wringing her hands. Arthur Sterling, now her boss, but unable to represent her due to his involvement as a witness, sat beside her. Clear's throat. Breathe, Alice, Sterling said gently. You are not on trial. He is. It doesn't feel that way, Alice replied, her voice tight. Have you seen who he hired? Clinton Vale. Sterling nodded grimly. I know him. He's a shark. He doesn't care about the truth. He cares about creating doubt. He will try to rattle you. He will try to make you look small. Do not let him. The bailiff opened the door. Alice Bennett to the stand. Alice walked into the courtroom. The gallery was packed. She felt hundreds of eyes on her back. Preston Halloway sat at the defense table. He looked different, thinner, paler, wearing a modest grey suit instead of his usual flashiness. He didn't look at her, but his lawyer did. Clinton Vale was a man who looked like he had been carved out of ice. He had silver hair, a tan that was too perfect for February, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He watched Alice take the oath with a predatory stillness. The prosecution, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney David Ross, went through the direct examination smoothly. Alice recounted the night, the insults, the rudeness, the switch to Italian, and the specific phrases regarding the fraud. Then it was Clinton Vale's turn. Vale stood up slowly, buttoning his jacket. He didn't walk to the podium. He walked right up to the witness box, invading Alice's space, just as Preston had done months ago. Miss Bennett, Vale began, his voice smooth as silk. Let's talk about your financial situation on the night of November 14th. Objection, Ross called out. Relevance goes to motive, Your Honor, Vale shot back. The witness's credibility is the cornerstone of this case. The judge nodded. Overruled. You may answer? Vale turned back to Alice, smiling. You were 3 months behind on your rent, were you not? You had maxed out 2 credit cards. You had $40,000 in medical debt. Is that correct? Yes, Alice said quietly. My mother is sick. Of course, Vale said, feigning sympathy. It's a terrible tragedy. Desperate times call for desperate measures, don't they? I suppose, Alice said cautiously. And on that night, Vale continued, his voice hardening. Mr. Halloway was rude to you. He hurt your feelings. He humiliated you in front of his date. Is that right? He was abusive. Yes. So Vale paced in front of the jewelry box. We have a desperate, debt-ridden woman who has just been insulted by a billionaire who conveniently speaks a language she claims to understand perfectly. Isn't it true, Miss Bennett, that you saw an opportunity to invent a crime to extort a settlement? No, Alice said, her voice shaking slightly. I heard him confess. Did you, Vale? Spun around. You say you speak Italian, but you're not Italian, are you? You're a girl from Queens. You learned Italian in a classroom. I have a master's degree, Alice defended. Academic Italian Vale scoffed. Mr. Halloway was speaking in a casual, fast-paced Neapolitan dialect mixed with business slang. It's very easy to mishear things in a crowded, noisy restaurant when you're tired and emotional. Isn't it possible, he said, these documents are complex rather than these documents are fake? In Italian, falsi and faticosi can sound similar over the clatter of dishes to an untrained ear. The jury looked at Alice. She could see the doubt creeping into their eyes. Vale was good. He was making her expertise look like a high school hobby. I didn't mishear, Alice insisted. He said falsi. He was very clear. Vale leaned in his face inches from hers. Are you sure? Because if you are wrong, you destroyed a man's life over a misunderstanding. Can you look at the jury and swear on your mother's life that you didn't just hear what you wanted to hear to get revenge on a rude customer? The room was silent. Alice looked at Preston. Clear his throat. He was smirking now. A tiny, triumphant smirk. Alice took a deep breath. She thought of the fear in Jessica's eyes that night. She thought of the arrogance. I'm not wrong, Alice said, her voice still. No further questions. Vale dismissed her with a wave of his hand, as if she were garbage. As Alice stepped down, her legs felt like jelly. She felt like she had failed. Vale had planted the seed. The angry broke waitress narrative was taking root. The third day of the trial brought a suffocating heaviness to the federal courtroom. The air conditioning hummed with a low mechanical drone that did little to cool the tension. By now, the jury looked exhausted. They had sat through hours of forensic accounting boredom and character assassinations. Clinton Vale Preston's defense attorney sat back in his leather chair looking like a man who had already ordered his victory champagne. He had successfully painted Alice Bennett as a disgruntled, financially desperate employee who hallucinated a crime to pay her mother's medical bills. The narrative was simple, clean, and devastatingly effective. Preston Halloway leaned over to whisper to Vale. Is it over? Can I leave? Relax. Vale whispered back, checking his watch. The prosecution is running on fumes. They have nothing left but hearsay. But Assistant U.S. Attorney David Ross stood up, adjusting his tie. He didn't look defeated. He looked like he was holding a royal flush. The people called Professor Dante Rossi to the stand. A ripple of confusion went through the gallery. Even the judge, the Honourable Margaret Calloway, looked over her spectacles. A linguistics professor in a fraud trial. The doors swung open and an elderly man entered. He moved with the slow, deliberate dignity of an old-world academic. He wore a tweed jacket that had seen better days and thick tortoise-shell glasses. He used a cane, the tap-tap-tap echoing on the wooden floor, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the room with terrifying intelligence. Alice sat up straighter in the gallery. Professor Rossi had been the terror of the Columbia Linguistics Department, a man who could spot a misplaced accent mark from across a lecture hall. Vale didn't stand up. He barely looked up from his notes, scribbling something that looked dismissive. Ross guided the professor through his credentials. 40 years of teaching, 12 published books on Romance languages consultant for the UN. Professor Ross began walking to the center of the room. You have reviewed the transcript of Ms. Bennett's testimony regarding the Italian phrases used by the defendant. You are also an expert in Italian dialects. Correct. I have dedicated my life to the study of the tongue. Rossi replied, his voice raspy, but projecting clearly to the back of the room. Language is not just words, Mr. Ross. It is the DNA of intent. Thank you, Ross said. Now Mr. Vale has suggested that Mrs. Bennett might have confused the word falsi, meaning fake, with fantasy, meaning difficult or strenuous. He argues that in a noisy restaurant amidst clattering dishes, these words sound identical. Is that true? Vale stood up, bored. Objection, speculation. The professor wasn't at the restaurant. I'm asking for an expert opinion on phonetics, Your Honor, Ross countered. Overruled, Judge Calloway said. Answer the question. Rossi adjusted his glasses, looking at Vale with the expression one might use for a misbehaving toddler. To the untrained ear, perhaps to a tourist, certainly, but Alice Bennet was not a tourist. She was my student for 4 years. She possesses what we call absolute pitch in linguistics. But that is irrelevant. Why is it irrelevant, Ross pressed? Because the defense's argument relies on the assumption that the words falsi and faticosi share a stress pattern, Rossi explained, turning to the jury. He raised a hand, conducting the air. Falsi is trochic stress on the first syllable. Hard stopfart is 4 syllables with a secondary stress. The rhythm is entirely different. You do not mistake a drum beat for a violin solo, no matter how loud the restaurant is. Vale stood up, buttoning his jacket. He decided it was time to crush the old man. Professor Rossi. Vale smiled, walking toward the stand. This is all very poetic, but let's be real. You're talking about textbook Italian. Dante's Italian. My client, Mr. Halloway, learned his Italian on the trading floors of Milan. It's fault. It's slang. It's messy. You can't apply your ivory tower rules to the real world. Language follows rules, Mr. Vale, Rossi said calmly. Even criminal ones. You admit that Mr. Halloway is not a native speaker, Vale pushed. Non-native speakers make mistakes. Maybe he used the wrong word. Maybe he meant to say risky and said fake by accident. You can't convict a man based on a slip of the tongue. Rossi smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile. Ah, the slip of the tongue theory. I was hoping you would bring that up. Rossi picked up a document from the stand. Ms. Bennet testified that Mr. Halloway said, "Once you sign, the debt is in your name. And then, sabanca indaga to tip de culpa. If the bank investigates, you take the blame." So Vio scoffed. He was warning her about the risks of the investment. It proves he was looking out for her. On the contrary, Rossi said, his voice dropping an octave, commanding absolute silence. It proves he was manipulating her. You see the verb indigare, to investigate, when used in a hypothetical clause involving risk, triggers the subjunctive mood in formal Italian. A native speaker would say laba indus. But Mr. Halloway used the indicative. He used the grammar of an English speaker, translating directly in his head. But here is the key. Rossi pointed a long, bony finger at Preston Halloway. So Bennet quoted him using the word presum. Vale rolled his eyes. We've been over this. It sounds like presto. It means, but he wanted the deal done. Paul, no, Mr. Vale. Rossi snapped, his patience gone. Prestonome does not mean what? It is a compound noun. Presta to lend. Nome name. A name lender. In Italian legal code article 374, a prestonome is a straw man, a front used specifically to shield the beneficial owner from criminal liability during money laundering. The jury started to shift. Notes were being taken furiously. The word preonome, Rossi continued relentlessly, has a very specific dental fricative sound structure. It does not sound like presto. It does not sound like prest. It is a word you only learn if you are studying 2 things: advanced criminal law or how to commit a crime. Rossi leaned forward. You don't accidentally order a straw man for dinner along with your risotto, Mr. Vale. And a waitress from Queens doesn't hallucinate a specific forensic accounting term in a Neapolitan dialect unless she heard it loud and clear. Vale looked stunned. The slip of the tongue defense had just backfired spectacularly. He had tried to paint Preston as a casual speaker, but Rossi had proven that the specific vocabulary Preston used revealed a premeditated intent to defraud. He could have heard it in a movie. Vale stammered, losing his cool. Perhaps, Rossi said dryly. The Godfather, maybe, though I believe they prefer the term consigliere. Laughter erupted in the gallery. The judge banged her. Gavel. Order. Mr. Vale, are you done? Vale sat down, his face red. Preston was glaring at him, whispering furiously. Fix this. But the nightmare wasn't over. As Rossi stepped down, the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom didn't just open, they were shoved. Let me through, a female voice cried out. Ma'am, you can't go in there. A biaf shouted. Heads turned. The commotion was loud enough to stop the proceedings. A woman pushed past the security guard. She was wearing a trench coat and large sunglasses, her blonde hair messy as if she'd been running. She pulled the sunglasses off. Her eyes were red-rimmed and terrified, but her jaw was set in stone. It was Jessica. "Your Honor!" Jessica screamed, clutching her purse to her chest. "Stop the trial. I have it." Preston Holloway stood up so fast, his chair fell backward with a deafening crash. "Jessica." He gasped, his face draining of all blood. No, don't sit down, Mr. Holloway," Judge Calloway ordered, signaling the marshals. "Who is this woman?" David Ross, the prosecutor, looked just as shocked as everyone else. "Your Honor, that is Jessica Moore, the missing witness." Jessica ran down the center aisle, ignoring the bailiff reaching for her arm. She didn't look at Alice. She didn't look at the judge. She looked straight at Preston, her eyes burning with a mixture of love and hate. "You told me I was crazy," she sobbed, her voice echoing in the silent room. "You told me Alice was lying. You told me I had to hide in London until this blew over. But I listened to it, Preston. I finally listened to it." "Objection!" Vale roared, jumping to his feet. "This is highly irregular. This witness was not on the list. She cannot just burst in here and testify." "I don't want to testify," Jessica yelled back. She ripped a small black digital recorder out of her bag. "I want to play this." She slammed the device onto the prosecutor's table. The room froze. "He made me record our business meetings," Jessica said, turning to the jury, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "He said it was for corporate compliance. He said he wanted to protect us. So I turned it on in the restaurant that night. I forgot it was running in my purse." Vale looked at the recorder like it was a bomb. "Your Honor, we cannot verify the chain of custody of that." "Mr. Vale, sit down," Judge Calloway said, her voice icy. She looked at Jessica. "Ms. Moore, are you swearing that this is an unedited recording of the night in question?" "I swear it on my life," Jessica whispered. The judge looked at the prosecutor. "Play it." "No," Preston shouted. "You can't." Two marshals grabbed Preston by the shoulders and forced him back into his chair. He was shaking, sweat pouring down his forehead. David Ross connected the device to the courtroom's audio system. He pressed play. Static filled the room. Then the ambient noise of Vincenzo's, the clinking of silverware, the hum of jazz, and then Preston's voice. Not the polished voice he used in court, but the sneering, arrogant voice of a man who thought he was a god. "The merger has to happen in Milan. If the regulatory board looks too closely at the books in New York, we're finished." The jury leaned in. Then the sound of Alice approaching, the polite introduction, the dismissal, and then the smoking gun. Jessica Preston's voice boomed through the speakers. Professor Rossi, sitting in the front row, nodded solemnly. Falsely clear as a bell. The translation was no longer needed. The tone said it all. It was the tone of a predator explaining the trap to the bait. Then came the rustle of fabric on the recording, and Alice's voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Misuzi, Senor." The courtroom listened to the entire exchange. Alice's perfect Italian, Preston's panicked denial, the shattering of the glass, and finally the last words on the tape spoken by Preston in English, after Alice walked away the first time. "Dumb waitress. She's too stupid to know she's holding the match that burns her own life down." Ross clicked the stop button. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a grave. Alice looked across the aisle at Preston. He wasn't looking at the jury. He wasn't looking at his lawyer. He was staring at the table, his hands trembling violently. He knew the shark in the pinstripe suit knew the game was over. Alice didn't feel triumph. She didn't feel joy. She felt a profound, quiet release. The weight of the tray was gone forever. Judge Calloway looked at the jury box. The jurors weren't looking at each other. They were looking at Preston Holloway with pure, unadulterated disgust. "Mr. Ross," the judge said quietly, "does the prosecution rest?" Ross looked at the recorder, then at Alice. He smiled. "Yes, Your Honor, the people rest." 3 years later, Alice sat in a corner booth at Vincenzo's. It was her first time back as a customer. She was wearing a cream-colored suit that cost more than her old car. Across from her sat Giovanni, who was no longer the manager, but the owner. He had bought the place when the previous owners retired. To the new junior partner, Giovanni beamed, raising a glass of vintage Barola. Alice clinked her glass against his. To the best risotto in New York. She took a sip, savouring the taste of victory. Her mother was in remission, living in a condo Alice had bought for her in Florida. Alice had finished law school at night while working for Sterling, passing the bar exam in the top 1% of the state. Preston Halloway was currently serving year 3 of a 15-year sentence at a federal correctional facility in Otisville. Jessica had testified against him in exchange for immunity and was now running a non-profit helping victims of financial abuse. As Alice looked out the window at the New York skyline, she saw a new waiter nervously serving a table nearby. A rude businessman was snapping his fingers at the boy, complaining about the water. Alice watched the waiter freeze, looking terrified. She stood up. She wasn't just a patron anymore. She was Alice Bennett Esquire, and she didn't tolerate bullies. She walked over to the table, placing a hand gently on the waiter's shoulder to calm him. She looked down at the rude businessman. "Excuse me," Alice said, her voice carrying that same dangerous polite steel from years ago. "Is there a problem here?" The man looked up, ready to argue, but he stopped. He recognized her. Everyone in New York recognized her. She was the lawyer who took down the giants. "No," the man stammered, pulling his hand back. "No problem, everything is excellent." "Good." Alice smiled. "Because the service in this city is world class. You just have to know how to listen." She walked back to her table, leaving the man silent and the waiter smiling. And that is the story of how arrogance became Preston Halloway's downfall. He thought money gave him the right to treat people like furniture, but he forgot the golden rule. Be careful who you step on, because they might be the only one who knows how to save you or destroy you. Alice proved that dignity and education are worth more than any Italian silk suit. If you enjoyed this story of karma and justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon. I want to know from you. Have you ever seen instant karma happen in real life? Tell me your story in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.